One lake in Siberia holds nearly 20% of Earth's unfrozen fresh water. No one has fully explained why it happened here and nowhere else. It plunges past 1,600 meters at its deepest point, deeper than any lake on the planet. Geologists estimate it has existed for 25 to 30 million years, old enough to predate the Himalayas. Sealed in the middle of a continent, more than 1,000 kilometers from the nearest ocean, it is also home to a seal species that, on paper, should not be able to live there at all. Over the next few minutes, we'll walk through 11 documented facts about this lake, each one stranger than the last, and save the strangest, the one that still doesn't fully add up, for the very end. The lake is Lake Baikal, tucked into southern Siberia near the border with Mongolia, sitting inside one of the most active rift systems on the continent. Most lakes occupy basins carved out by retreating glaciers or shifting rivers. Baikal is different. It sits inside an actual crack in the Earth's crust, one that is still pulling apart today.
This fault line here,
Researchers studying the rift have estimated it widens by roughly 2 centimeters a year, which has led some geologists to argue that Baikal isn't really a lake at all, but an ocean in its earliest infancy, following the same kind of rifting that once opened the Red Sea. That classification is far from settled, and it's exactly the kind of claim that splits geologists. Feel free to argue it out in the comments. But the argument over what to call this place is nothing compared to what its depth actually does to the water inside it. At 1,642 meters, Baikal's deepest point sits lower than the floor of most seas connected to any ocean. Sunlight stops reaching the water within the first few hundred meters, and by the time you reach the bottom, the pressure is roughly 160 times what you'd feel standing at the surface. The water down there sits at a nearly constant temperature just above freezing, year-round, regardless of season. That alone isn't unusual for a deep lake. Most large, deep lakes settle into a cold, stable bottom layer. Just hold on to the number 1,642, though, because depth like that changes everything else about how this lake behaves. Baikal's age is where the numbers stop feeling like statistics and start feeling like geologic time made physical. At an estimated 25 to 30 million years old, it was already an ancient lake before the Himalayan range had finished rising out of the collision between the Indian and Eurasian plates. Most lakes on Earth, including the Great Lakes of North America, are geological infants by comparison, shaped by the last ice age roughly 10 to 20,000 years ago. Baikal has outlived that entire process more than 1,000 times over. Compared to what's coming later in this list, though, its age is still the easy part to explain. The harder question is what that much time, sealed inside a single basin, actually built. Here's what that much time built. A single basin holding close to 20% of all the unfrozen fresh water on the surface of the Earth. By volume, Baikal alone holds more water than all 5 of North America's Great Lakes combined, despite covering a fraction of their surface area. That's possible because of the depth. A narrow, plunging basin can store far more water per square kilometer than a wide, shallow one. Officially, the explanation for that volume is straightforward. Depth multiplied by age multiplied by a closed drainage basin. The problem is that no other rift lake on Earth, including ones of similar age, has come anywhere close to matching that number. And the water that accumulated inside it isn't ordinary water either. Baikal is also among the clearest bodies of fresh water ever measured. In late winter and early spring, researchers have recorded visibility exceeding 40 meters straight down through the ice, deep enough to make a boat photographed from below appear to be floating in midair. That level of clarity usually points to very low nutrient levels and very little suspended sediment, both of which Baikal has in unusual abundance for a lake its size. If you'd been the first surveyor to drop a line into water that clear back in the 1800s, with none of the science available to explain it, try explaining that yourself. The clarity isn't just a visual curiosity. It's a clue to something living in that water that shouldn't be there. More than 80% of the roughly 2,700 animal species documented in Baikal exist nowhere else on Earth, according to biologists who have surveyed the lake for over a century. That includes the golomyanka, a nearly translucent fish that lives at extreme depth and is made up largely of oil, and freshwater sponges that carpet parts of the lake floor like a coral reef. This is now the third documented case in this list of Baikal behaving less like an ordinary lake and more like an isolated ocean basin. First, the rift geology, then the sheer water volume, and now an entire ecosystem found nowhere else on the planet. If topics like isolated ecosystems and deep-time biology are the kind of thing you find interesting, this channel walks through one documented anomaly like this every week, so it might be worth sticking around for what comes next. Here's one detail that keeps professional limnologists coming back to Baikal specifically. In most deep lakes, the water below a few hundred meters is essentially stagnant, and oxygen levels drop towards zero the deeper you go. Baikal doesn't follow that pattern. Researchers have documented measurable oxygen at the very bottom of the lake, more than 1,600 meters down, which shouldn't be possible without some mechanism actively mixing surface water downward. Officially, a process called thermobaric instability explains it, where cold water near the freezing point behaves differently under extreme pressure and can sink past layers that would normally block it. The problem is that researchers still don't fully agree on how much of the total mixing that single mechanism accounts for. And that debate is not the strangest thing this lake has produced. Not yet. Every winter, Baikal freezes over with ice so transparent that from above the surface, you can see straight down to fish and rock formations several meters below. Picture standing on ice that clear, watching movements several meters beneath your boots. How many people do you think have stood there without knowing what was living underneath them? Satellite images captured over the past 2 decades have also revealed a separate, unexplained phenomenon. Near-perfect circular patches of thin ice, sometimes more than 5 kilometers across, appearing in roughly the same regions of the lake each year. Researchers, including teams working with NASA imagery, have proposed that the circles form above warm water upwellings rising from the depths, but the exact trigger and why the circles hold such a precise round shape has not been confirmed. What do you think keeps that shape so consistent year after year? That's a genuine open question in limnology, not just a video hook, and it's worth leaving your theory in the comments. The ice, strange as it is something you can at least see from orbit. What lives underneath it is a different kind of mystery entirely. Go back to that number from the opening, because it's about to matter again. 20% of the world's unfrozen fresh water sitting inside one basin also means Baikal functions as a genuine deep water ecosystem, not just a large puddle. And deep, stable ecosystems are exactly where you'd expect something unusual to take hold over millions of years. That something is the Baikal seal, known locally as the nerpa, the only seal species on Earth that lives its entire life in fresh water. All nerpa have been documented diving past 200 meters and living well past 40 years, longer than most marine seal species typically manage in the ocean, and they do it more than 1,000 kilometers from the nearest saltwater coastline, fully landlocked, generation after generation. No one disputes that the nerpa is a genuine seal, closely related to Arctic ringed seals. It's the second part, how it actually got there, that causes the argument. The leading hypothesis is that ancestral seals migrated up ancient river systems connected to the Arctic Ocean during a period when regional waterways were far more interconnected than they are today, eventually becoming isolated inside Baikal as the surrounding geography changed. Genetic studies place the nerpa's separation from its ocean-dwelling relatives somewhere between roughly 400,000 and a few million years ago, though estimates vary significantly depending on the method researchers use. What no one has been able to pin down is the exact route those ancestral seals took, or how many generations that journey actually required. Some biologists point toward a path through what is now the Yenisei and Angara river systems. Others argue the true route may never be reconstructed from the evidence available. Where do you land on this one? Is it a solvable puzzle, or one science may never fully close? That should have settled the question by now. It hasn't, and the lake floor beneath those seals has its own unexplained activity going on. Beneath the nerpa's diving range, the floor of Baikal is dotted with documented methane seeps, places where gas rises up through the sediment and, in the coldest, highest pressure zones, forms solid deposits known as gas hydrates. This isn't a fringe claim. Russian and international research expeditions have mapped dozens of these seep sites since the 1990s, some large enough to produce patches of visibly thinner ice in winter. The methane itself is tied directly to Baikal's identity as an active rift, not an ordinary lake basin. The same tectonic forces pulling the crust apart are also releasing gas trapped deep below. Officially, these seeps are a well-documented feature of rift geology, similar in principle to seeps found on ocean floors near tectonic boundaries. The detail that doesn't fit as neatly is that some of the microbial communities living around these freshwater seeps closely resemble those found at deep ocean vents thousands of kilometers away, in conditions no fresh water should be able to replicate. That resemblance alone raises a bigger question about what, exactly, this lake actually is. Put all of that together, and the paradox becomes hard to ignore. Baikal is a freshwater basin, sealed in the middle of a continent, that has independently produced nearly every hallmark of an ocean. An active spreading rift, a body of water deep enough to fully degas and pressurize, methane seep ecosystems that echo life found only at ocean vents, and a seal species with genuine marine ancestry living out its entire life cycle 1,000 kilometers from the sea. If you had stood on the shore of this lake without knowing any of that, you would have just seen very clear, very cold water. Nothing about the surface would have told you what was happening underneath. No other lake on Earth has assembled all four of those features in one place. Researchers who study rift lakes elsewhere, including several in East Africa, have noted individual traits that echo this one, but never this complete a set, and never sustained for this long. That's the detail this whole video has been building toward. Not the depth, not the age, not even the seal on its own, but the fact that an inland basin quietly built itself into something that behaves like a young ocean in nearly every measurable way except its cancellation. How exactly one landlocked rift produced almost every ingredient of a sea, without ever actually becoming one, is a question that doesn't have a complete answer yet. Leave your theory in the comments, because right now, the researchers don't have one either. That number from the very beginning, nearly 20% of all the unfrozen fresh water on Earth, held inside one lake in Siberia, is proven, measured, and published across decades of hydrological surveys. So is the lake's depth, its estimated age, and the existence of the nerpa as a genuine freshwater-adapted seal species. What remains unresolved is the harder half of the story. The exact migratory path and timeline that carried a marine mammal 1,000 kilometers inland, the full extent of the mechanism behind the deep water oxygen that keeps the bottom of the lake alive, and why a single rift basin assembled so many ocean-like features without ever connecting to open water. Baikal sits at the edge of a much larger question that shows up anywhere landlocked water meets deep time. How much of what gets called isolated is really just a slower, older kind of connection that hasn't been fully traced yet? Somewhere in the sediment at the bottom of that lake, more than 1,600 meters down, is a record of exactly how the seals got there. No one has recovered it yet.